Hello and welcome to Finals Focus, thanks to Sharp EIT Solutions. Sarah Olle back with Alastair Clarkson and Matthew Lloyd as we build up to Saturday's decider between the Sydney Swans and Brisbane Lions. Clarko, we're kind of harking back to 1899. That was Fitzroy in South Melbourne back then. Two non-Victorian sides with their roots firmly in Victoria. I'm just wondering, who would you rather be? The Swans that have had a pretty cushy lead-in, a home prelim at the SCG, or Brisbane, who travelled down to the MCG and will be battle-hardened after that epic prelim against Geelong?
Well, both these sides have got great histories, and not just the teams deserving the chance, but their clubs. You know, they've been around for a long period of time historically, but even the last 10 years, you know, have worked really, really hard to give themselves this chance to win a grand final. And which has had the best preparation? Gee, there have been different preparations, but it's just so hard to pick a winner in this game, which is just intriguing for all the fans and intriguing for us who are sitting and watching and just wondering what's going to all unfold on Saturday afternoon.
Selection's another huge story, Clarko, through the next few days. Some key training sessions coming up today for the Sydney Swans and Brisbane Lions tomorrow, I believe. But just on Callum Mills, he's a captain of the Sydney Swans. What would be running through John Longmire's mind, particularly even if he gets through this main session today, only 11 days off a hamstring?
Really, really tough, because there's heartbreak stories every year with grand final victors or the losers, and it'll all depend on today's session. If he can get through really, really strongly and convince the Sydney coaching staff that he's okay to get through, it'll all sort of depend on what role he'd play. If he's expected to play a midfield role, that'll be really, really tough. He's got to roll down back. So all those factors will come into it. But I dare say the status that he's got at that footy club, he's a co-captain. I'd expect that if he gets through today's session, then he'll be playing.
Does it change it because he is the skipper of the club? Does that come into the decision at all?
Without a doubt, yeah. He'd have significant influence on that playing group. He's a leader for a reason, and that's his organisation of teammates, his inspiration as both a footballer and a young man. I'd fully expect that is a key part of why Horse would want to play him.
So you only have to go back to round 19 when these two sides last met. It was a hot Sunday at the Gabba, and it was a hot game indeed. Brisbane getting the chocolates by 2 points. Lloydie, this is going to be a sensational matchup come Bounce Town on Saturday, and ball movement is going to be key for the Swans. It
is, Sarah. And Alastair Clarkson, I want to talk to you about what the Swans did. They just dismantled Port Adelaide. It was such great coaching. So Port Adelaide, their pressure was extreme against Hawthorn. Like, it was as good a pressure game as I've seen from a team, but they just didn't allow for Port Adelaide to bring that pressure to the Sydney Swans because of the way they controlled this game of football. So a lot of marks, they had 130 marks by the end of it, a lot of junk marks late because I think they preserved themselves in the last quarter for this grand final. But is that the way they play generally, Clarko, the Sydney Swans, with how they play the game? Yeah, the last 2 or 3 years they've done this really, really well. Ironically, Brisbane do it terrifically well too. But Port Adelaide couldn't defend the width of the over, the much wider Sydney ground last week compared to the narrower Adelaide Oval ground against Hawthorn. So it meant that they were able to find these uncontested marks and build the ball up, change angles, bring their defence up behind the ball with them. And then when Port often got their opportunity, they tried to go too quick, and Port were unable. If they turned the ball over, they were unable to penetrate, and Sydney really hurt them on the way back. And you know, most of their goals were caused from turnover. Yeah, 11 goals to 3 it was turnover. Just a masterclass by the Sydney Swans and their players. Just on Brisbane, you alerted us all here to the fact of the way Brisbane like to use the ball, and they have a measured build-up too. So this was them in a game against Melbourne, just the way they have that ability to play the game and do exactly what we just showed the Sydney Swans doing. But in the last 2 finals, they've been in all sorts of trouble. They looked shot 44 points down against the GWS, and then against Geelong, they're in all sorts of trouble, and they turn to this mode, Clarko. So talk us through, as a coach, when you go from one mode to the other. Well, it's really, really difficult to be able to sustain high-tempo footy. The game goes for 130 minutes or thereabouts across 4 quarters, and it's just so difficult to maintain that type of energy and level of effort for the full 4 quarters. So the really, really good sides are the sides that can actually change gears. Sometimes that change of gears occurs because out of necessity, but you get halfway through the 3rd quarter and you have 4 goals down, like happened in the Geelong game, and even further behind the week before against GWS. And that's when Fags pulled the trigger and said, we've got to take some more risks with the ball here and go a little bit quicker.
if you do that right from the start, there's going to be a period of the game where you just have to slow yourself down, and it's risky to go really, really quick because the opposition have got a greater chance of being able to turn the ball over and then penetrate into your defence really, really quickly. So the teams that are really, really successful, and the side that did it best last year was Collingwood, changed gears either really, really fast or really slow. And both these sides have found a capacity to be able to do it this year, and that's going to be the intriguing part of the game for mine, is that which team can get the momentum and which team can then try and wrest that momentum back again.
So that kamikaze style of football that we saw in the second half, it can't be done for 4 quarters, that's what you're saying?
That's right. I think every side would like to be able to start that way, but at some point in time, an opposition is going to get a run on. So it's just so difficult to maintain it for the whole 4 quarters.
There's often a hard luck story when it comes to the grand final, and that is Big O, Oscar McInerney, the much-loved Lions ruckman. We can see here dislocating his shoulder. He won't feature. We saw Joe Danaher soldier that responsibility against Geelong. What do they do? We know that Darcy Fort is coming into this side, so he will ruck, but how will it change the complexion of what they do with Joe Danaher and indeed that forward line?
Well, I think it's a real bonus for the Brisbane side. And it sounds terrible that Big O's out of the side, but it might actually be of real benefit. We saw in the game in the prelim final against Geelong, when Big O went out of the game, Joey was forced to go into the ruck, and it enabled the Brisbane side to have a different type of look in their forward half. They were a lot more mobile in their front end. Obviously with Joe, he draws the ball in terms of a marking contest, but it allowed them to have a greater mix of players. They changed angles, and the Geelong defence looked all at sea without Joe down there. So, strangely enough, if he can play sort of 30 or 40% of his time in the ruck, I think he does very well in that position as well. He's a beautiful mark, he's a beautiful penetrating kick, so he can do some good work in the middle of the ground and change their forward structure. So I think, strangely enough, out of what is really disappointing for Big O, it could actually be a real benefit to Brisbane.
How big an influence do you believe ruckmen have? Because if I'm the Sydney Swans and I'm Brodie Grundy, I'm saying, I've got Darcy Fort, he's played 2 games for the season. How much can I be the difference in this game of footy? So for you, ruckmen, some rate them, some don't. Where do they sit for you?
Well, the really difficult one with Fort coming in is we haven't seen him play at the level, and certainly not against Grundy. So I'm not sure what the Brisbane approach will be, whether they'll try and actually shark Grundy's hits or whether or not they'll try to read to Fort's hits. And that's the difficulty for both Fags and the Brisbane players, is to work out who's going to actually win that battle. You'd think it would be Grundy, but it's really you've got to actually back your player in. Now he's a big man, Fort, and he's very, very, very capable. It's just the fact that they've decided over the last 12 months. 2 years ago they were trying, all 3 of them really. Danaher mainly is just a key forward, and the other 2, Big O and Fort, as the ruck combination. But Fort's dropped out of that. Now Big O's dropped out because of injury, so he'll come in. He's a very, very capable player, Fort, and a big, strong body, so he'll be able to compete with Grundy, and it's going to be an intriguing battle, that one.
Now, Clarko, you've cast your eye over some key matchups for Saturday's match, so let's get them up now. We don't usually see so many matchups, I guess, because of the way team defence is structured, but are things heightened on a grand final day because of the importance of the match? I mean, what do you like from those matchups there, Clarko?
Yeah, well, I feel like the Papley-Starcevic matchup, and it might not be Starcevic, it might be Ainsworth. Starcevic might be given a role of trying to capture Heaney when he slips forward, or Warner. So it'll be really interesting what they do. But what I do know is that if Brisbane don't put a stamp on Papley, he's such an energetic provider of just spirit for the Sydney side. And sometimes those fire starters can be really, really positive for your team, but if they're not a fire starter, they can also be a labour for your side as well. So it'll be really intriguing. He provides so much energy for that group, and I think someone needs to try to keep him out of the game.
Who was that at Hawthorn for you? Like, who was the Papley? There was a fire starter at the Hawks through your premiership era.
Well, the 3 guys that we had in that role, which was Bruce, Rioli and Pioplo, were all really, really humble, quiet guys by nature off the field. So they weren't really the spirit. Probably Ruffy was the spirit within the front half. A different sort of player, obviously, than those 3 smalls, but Yeah, every side needs one, and Papley is probably the best at it in the competition right at the present time.
Lachie Neale, I was with Jack Gunsinger in the week. He said he thought Sam Mitchell would be the cleanest player he ever saw and played with, but he said Lachie Neale's become number one.
Yeah.
So Lachie Neale, like James Rowbottom, how aggressive can you go through centre bounce and around the ground, as a tagging or run with?
Oh, he's an important player, Rowbottom.
Yeah.
You know, the whole midfield of Sydney has spoken about, Heaney and Goulden and the like and Warner, but this guy has just played sort of cooling type of roles on the opposition jet nearly the whole year and for a few years now. So he's going to have a really, really important role. I'd imagine, given the influence of Neale last week, he's the leading stoppage player, clearance player last week for the Brisbane side and the game. So I'd expect Rowbottom would just, especially around stoppage, go to him. But once again, another really critical matchup to the outcome of this game.
He's doing it as well, Lloyd Izorko, with a bad foot. He's getting that injected before every game. So
Neale.
It's been Lachie Neale, it's been an incredible effort as well. What about Dane Zorko, though? Because he's been damaging off half-back. He can also cough it up at times, but he might be pivotal for Brisbane come Saturday.
Oh, absolutely. He's a star. Zorko, I think we just spoke about, he could win his sixth best and fairest. So he's doing wonderful things. So, yeah, as I said, his first two halves, he had Peatling in the first final, and then he coughed up a few goals on Brad Close, where he's just too aggressive. I know that might be his role, Clarko, but can you be too aggressive as a half-back flanker? Or would Fague say, no, you go and do what you have to do because your offence marries up on your defence? And who would you put to him as well? Yeah,
well, I think he's got a licence. I feel like he's the mastermind of the ball movement of Brisbane. He's the one that dictates whether it goes fast or goes slow, and that's why it's really, really important that for the Sydney's point of view that they try to stamp that out, because he will dictate the game, and sometimes that will be at risk and it'll turn the ball over, which occasionally we see, but that is the beauty of these guys, that they're prepared to take the risk. If they make a mistake, they don't lament on it and they just get back on it again. And that's what happened in the last week's game. He wasn't so good early, Zorko, but gee, he was important in the second half.
Isaac Heaney may not have won the Brownlow, but I think he's the best player in the game right now. And I was critical of him this time last year for his final series, but he's just a different beast this year, what he can do. Like, he's gone in the midfield. I think with Callum Mills going down and Parker not being the player he was, he can do everything. So centre bounce, he's physical, he's one of the best marks, or he is the best midfield mark in the game, and then he goes forward and kicks goals. So again, is it what player goes to him? They've got Berry, they've got Dunkley. What can you stop him all around the ground, or they have to mix and match?
Yeah, I think Dunkley will try to take care of him around stoppage. It's the when he drifts forward that's the danger, and how can they hand him over? Because I don't think Dunkley will go into the back end to pick him up there. He'll just go to another midfielder when he's in the middle of the ground. But if Heaney goes forward, I think that's the only uncertainty I have about Starcevic versus Papley, because I think Starcevic would be the perfect type of matchup for Heaney when he goes forward. But once again, it's going to be an intriguing matchup. He's a star player. I'm sure Horse is sitting there thinking to himself, why the hell has it taken us 8 or 9 years to get Heaney into the middle of the ground? Because he has been an absolute superstar this year, and I'd expect him to have another really, really pivotal role to play on the weekend.
I mean, is there such thing as an untaggable player? When Isaac Heaney is in the rich vein of form that he is, he's got the 20 coaches' votes, or the Gary Ez votes, I should say, for the Player of the Finals series. He is just a superstar at the moment, Clarko.
Yeah, there's not a bloke that can't be tagged out of the game. If your sole role is just to negate the influence of a player, it can be done. The really good ones just make that their sole focus. But because he can roll through a number of positions, and even if he's negated a little bit, then other Sydney players can step in and play his role in the middle of the ground. Then it doesn't matter if Heaney has a great game or not. I think that they'd be looking at it in totality of how can their overall midfield and their rotations and the depth of their midfield be the reason why they win this game, not necessarily that they need Isaac to be best on ground for them to win this game.
Brian Lake was one of Clarko's Norm Smith medalists, and I think if Brisbane are to win, I think Harris Andrews has to play a big game, and I think the three talls wouldn't worry him at the Sydney Swans. I don't think any of those guys, the Marty, McLean, McDonald, would worry him. So he's just such a great reader of the play, interceptor of the game. So I think Luke Parker, who I thought did a wonderful job last week after quarter time on Alir, could be somebody they set to him. So I've seen Owens do a good job at St Kilda. I've also seen Will Hoskin Elliott late this season do a good job on Harris Andrews when Collingwood beat them late in the season at the MCG. So that's something I'd potentially look at if I'm John Longmire.
It seems like that's the role that Luke Parker's been playing for the Sydney side over the last little while. Pinch has hit a little bit in the middle of the ground, but the danger of him is if you don't pay attention to him, you'll kick 2 or 3 goals, and that's why O'Leary was always looking over his shoulder to see where his opponent was in terms of Parker. And Parker, very, very experienced, very, very clever, can compete in the air. Obviously a very, very good ground level player, and he's playing a really, really important role for the Sydney side just at the present time.
We've spoken about Isaac Heaney, we've mentioned Chad Warner. Are we forgetting Errol Goulden? Because he's the other one, isn't he, who can be so damaging, particularly with his run on the wings. Is there a player, Clarko, that you think will go to him?
I don't think so. I think that if you try to nullify all of them, you'll end up just chasing your own tail and not be able to get on offence yourself. Brisbane have got some significant threats themselves that the Sydney side need to be worried about the Brisbane side. So it's trying to find that balance. Sure, I'm sure they'd have plans in all their what-if meetings to say, if Goulden gets off the leash, what do we do to try to stamp him and negate the influence he's having on the game? But you can't go into the game saying we're going to tag all 3 of their dangerous midfielders, because to be fair, Sydney could be thinking exactly the same thing about the Brisbane midfield, because over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, they've got a really, really powerful midfield as well.
Sarah, I'd pay to go and watch Hugh McCluggage v Errol Goulden.
Yeah.
Just go. They probably wouldn't see each other for the rest of the day once they shake hands at the start, but it'd be a nice match-up out on the wing.
40 touches each as well. Now, aren't we lucky, Lloydie? We've been discussing the grand final with Alastair Clarkson, who 4 times as a premiership coach has lifted the silverware. And that's why we're going to put a bit of pressure on you, Clarko. We're going to get to Clarko's corner. But before we do, let's cast our mind back to last year's decider.
Here we are. It's taken 7 years. You've got to win these games over and over again. No one's going to hand you it on a platter today. Today we get the chance to get football's holy grail. How good is that? At stoppages between the arcs and long down the line, we're not protecting corridor very well, and they're getting through there. We need to be better organised on that. That is critical. Just tell them down the bench, we don't need any heroes. We just need to do basic things really well. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the chocolates, but we were scraping all day today. Get out and get around the players. We deserve to win, mate. We had more shots and all that.
It's such an incredible opposition, mate.
Well done, mate. Good.
Now, that was 2023, but a decade earlier, it was Alastair Clarkson pumping up his side, coming off that 2012 grand final loss to the Swans.
We've got ourselves into that position now where we've got a chance. We've had a lot of lessons, suffering, which we've had to endure last year. Suffering really is the pathway to success. That's what we've had to go through. To a man, we have to sacrifice for one another, and we have to go and do everything we've got.
And we know what happened. Redemption is what happened, Clarko. How do you feel looking back on that?
Yeah, well, it makes the spine tingle a little bit. Just recollecting all the pain and suffering and hard work that went into getting to a grand final in the first instance, and then you lose a grand final against Sydney the year before, 2013. And the really intriguing part about this is the 2 sides that are playing this weekend have both been grand final losers in the last 2 years. So there's going to be significant redemption, in a sense, for the Sydney Swans, because they will want to erase that terrible memory of getting beaten so convincingly against Geelong 2 years ago, and then the heartbreak of being so close last year by Brisbane. They've got their own redemption story too. So it's going to be a really, really intriguing battle, but they will no doubt, whether it's the coaches or the players themselves, be thinking back to last year in Brisbane or 2 years ago Sydney as a significant motivator, because desire is the greatest motivating force there is, and they've both got this enormous desire to try and win this grand final. Sometimes it's going to take this moment of redemption to try to be the thing that fuels just this extra effort, that extra contest, that extra winning effort that might just be the thing that gets them over the line. Like in last week's game, just extraordinary how many of those pivotal moments right deep into the game, and they become crucial.
They've done a great job, Brisbane and Alastair Clarkson, because I think they started slowly, and it's hard to pick yourself back up when you've had such a tight loss like they have mid-season. You have to say to them, I know we're not travelling well, but let's just start dancing. Let's get our season up and running again. It's been a wonderful turnaround. I
think it's going to be an epic grand final. You can make cases for either side. I know you've got the sentiment towards Chris Fagan. You're leaning that way, Clarko, with the Lions.
Yeah, I am leaning just towards the Lions. I think they've got a beautiful depth across all lines and not as heavy a reliance on Sydney's key players to be pivotal. And in a big game, I think that is really, really instrumental.
Lloyd?
Yeah, I'm the opposite direction. I just think they've been the best side all year, and I think when you get 3 or 4 games in front, you can sort of mentally ease off a little bit, and then they've come back and they've won their last 5. I think they've only had the 2, they've played, and then I think their build-up, Brisbane have to do a lot to get there. Some probably prefer that. I think Sydney have had a pretty good run into this grand final, so I think they win it.
It's a flip of the coin either way. Thank you so much for joining us on Finals Focus. Enjoy the grand final this weekend. Should be a beauty.
Join me, Cal Toomey,
and me, Riley Beveridge,
every Wednesday on Gettable, the definitive source of everything you need to know for player movement, trade, free agency, draft and contracts.
Watch Gettable every Wednesday or catch it as a podcast wherever you listen.